They looked at his worn-out loafers and saw a failure. They looked at his middle seat ticket and saw a nobody. On Flight 902, from Zurich to New York, the cabin crew and a VIP passenger didn't just ignore Damon Kinsley. They turned him into the in-flight entertainment, laughing as coffee stained his only shirt. But arrogance has a funny way of blinding you to the person holding the checkbook. What they didn't know was that Damon wasn't flying economy because he was broke. He was flying economy to see exactly who he needed to fire. And by the time the seatbelt sign turned off, their careers were already frozen. The air inside the cabin of Stratosphere Airlines Flight 902 was thick with the scent of reheated pasta and recycled oxygen. In seat 34B, sandwiched between a snoring backpacker and a nervous flyer gripping the armrest, sat Damon Kinsley. Damon didn't look like a man who could move markets. At 45, his hairline was retreating, and his charcoal suit, though clean, bore the distinct shine of polyester that had seen too many dry cycles. He was typing furiously on a laptop that looked like a relic from 2015, the fan whirring loudly enough to earn annoyed glances from the row in front. "Excuse me," Damon said softly, raising a hand as the flight attendant cart rattled down the narrow aisle. "Could I possibly get some water? It's been about 3 hours." Tiffany, the senior purser with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, didn't even break stride. She was too busy looking past Damon towards the front of the economy cabin where the curtain separated the plebs from business class. "We're serving the beverage service shortly, sir. Please wait your turn," she snapped, her tone dripping with the kind of polite condescension reserved for unruly children. Damon nodded, shrinking back slightly. "Of course." "Sorry." He wasn't sorry. He was thirsty. And he was observant. The curtain swished open. A man stepped through, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne, Santal 33 and single malt scotch. This was Chadwick Sterling. If you read the business tabloids, you knew Chadwick. He was the VP of Customer Experience for Stratosphere Airlines, the son of the company's founder, and a man who wore his entitlement like a second skin. He was currently flying deadhead back to New York for the annual shareholders meeting, occupying the entire first row of first class, but he had wandered back to stretch his legs and flirt with the junior flight attendants. "Tiffany, darling," Chadwick boomed, his voice carrying over the drone of the engines. "The champagne up front is a little warm. Can we get some ice from the back galley? The machine up front is on the fritz." "Immediately, Mr. Sterling." Tiffany beamed, her posture shifting from exhausted to eager in a nanosecond. She grabbed a bucket. "Anything else?" "Yeah, look at this cattle car," Chadwick laughed, leaning against the overhead bin above row 33, just one row ahead of Damon. He gestured vaguely at the passengers. "I keep telling the board we should shrink the legroom by another 2 inches. Look at them, they're still fitting in the seats. That's lost revenue." A few passengers grumbled, but most kept their heads down. You don't argue with a man in a $3,000 suit when you're stuck in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. Damon, however, stopped typing. He looked up through his wire-rimmed glasses. "Actually," Damon said, his voice calm, but cutting through the low hum, "studies show that reducing pitch below 30 inches increases the risk of DVT and drastically lowers customer retention rates. It's bad math." The cabin went silent. The snoring backpacker woke up. Chadwick slowly turned his head, looking down at Damon like he had stepped in something unpleasant on a sidewalk. He squinted, taking in the cheap suit, the old laptop, the middle seat. "I'm sorry," Chadwick chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Did the seat pocket safety card speak to me? Because I know you aren't trying to give Chadwick Sterling business advice from seat 34B. Tiffany rushed forward, positioning herself between Chadwick and Damon like a bodyguard. "Sir, please do not disturb Mr. Sterling. He is a high-ranking executive. Keep your comments to yourself, or I will have you written up for a disturbance." "I'm just stating a fact," Damon said, closing his laptop, "and I'm still waiting for that water." Chadwick grinned, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He reached onto Tiffany's cart, grabbed a half-empty bottle of lukewarm water intended for the trash, and tossed it. It landed in Damon's lap, the cap loose. Water splashed over the crotch of his trousers and onto the keyboard of his laptop. "Hydration is key," Chadwick mocked. "Compliments of the house. Now, Tiffany, about that ice." The crew erupted into giggles. Tiffany covered her mouth, trying to hide her amusement, but her eyes gave it away. She looked at Damon with pure disdain. "Clean that up," she hissed, "and don't ring the call bell again." Damon didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He simply took a handkerchief from his pocket, the one piece of high-quality silk he owned, and dabbed at his keyboard. He watched the water seep into the keys. He watched Chadwick saunter back through the curtain, high-fiving another flight attendant on the way. Damon looked at the flight attendant's name tag, Tiffany, Senior Purser. Then he looked at the man disappearing behind the curtain. "Chadwick Sterling," Damon whispered to himself, testing the name on his tongue. It tasted like blood. He pulled a small, battered notebook from his inner jacket pocket. He turned to a fresh page and wrote down 2 things. 1. Flight 902, Tiffany, Purser. 2. Chadwick Sterling, VP Customer Experience. Then he wrote a 3rd line, underlining it twice. Current stock price, $4.12. Target acquisition, price, $12,000. Damon Kinsley wasn't just a passenger. He was the managing partner of Obsidian Capital, a private equity firm known in Wall Street circles as the Reaper. And Stratosphere Airlines wasn't just his ride home. It was the company he had secretly spent the last 6 months acquiring a controlling interest in. The deal was set to close tomorrow morning. But after the water hit his lap, Damon decided the timeline needed to move up. When the plane touched down at JFK, the humiliation continued. As per standard procedure for disruptive passengers, which Damon had been labeled by Tiffany, he was made to wait until the entire plane deplaned before he could leave. He sat in the empty, trash-strewn cabin, listening to the cleaning crew vacuum. Tiffany stood at the bulkhead, arms crossed, tapping her foot. "You're lucky Mr. Sterling didn't press charges for harassment," she said, checking her watch. "You can go now. Try to dress better next time you fly. Maybe they'll treat you like a human being." "I'll keep that in mind," Damon said. He stood up, his pants still damp and cold against his skin. He grabbed his carry-on, a duffel bag that had seen better days, and walked past her. "Have a good night, Tiffany." Yeah, she waved him off. Damon walked up the jet bridge, the cold New York air biting at his face. He navigated through customs, ignoring the judgmental looks from the officers, scanning his rumpled appearance. He walked out to the arrivals curb, where lines of taxis honked and fumed. But Damon didn't get in a taxi. He walked past the Uber pickup zone, past the shuttle buses, to a secluded area of the pickup lane, where a single, blacked-out Rolls-Royce Phantom was idling. The driver, a mountain of a man named Arthur, who had been with Damon since his first hedge fund days, stepped out immediately. He didn't blink at Damon's wet pants or cheap suit. He knew the drill. Damon often went undercover to test the products of companies he was buying. It was how he found the rot that balance sheets hid. "Rough flight, sir?" Arthur asked, opening the rear suicide door. "Educational, Arthur." "Very educational," Damon replied, sliding into the butter-soft leather interior. The smell of the cabin, lavender and heated leather, was a stark contrast to the stale air of seat 34B. The meeting is set for 8 a.m. at Stratosphere HQ, Arthur said, looking in the rearview mirror. Mr. Sterling, the father, is expecting the mystery investor to sign the bailout papers. Change of plans, Damon said, pulling a fresh, bespoke Italian suit from the garment bag hanging in the car. He began to change right there in the back seat. We're going to the HQ tonight. Call the board. Tell them the deal happens in 1 hour, or it doesn't happen at all. Sir, it's 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. They'll be at dinner or home. Then tell them to put down their forks, Damon said, tying a Windsor knot with practiced precision. And Arthur, find out where the flight crew from Flight 902 is staying. I want them at the HQ tomorrow morning for a mandatory debriefing. Tell them it's regarding a VIP complaint. Will do, sir. And Chadwick Sterling? Damon smiled, a cold, thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, he'll be there. He thinks he's getting a promotion tomorrow. The Stratosphere Airlines headquarters was a glass monolith in downtown Manhattan, a testament to money the airline no longer had. The lights on the 40th floor were blazing. Damon walked into the lobby wearing a suit that cost more than a flight attendant's annual salary. He had swapped the wire-rimmed glasses for his contacts. He looked younger, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. The night receptionist, a young man barely out of college, looked up in panic. Sir, the building is closed to the public. I'm not the public, Damon said, breezing past the security turnstile without breaking stride. Arthur flashed a badge that made the security guard sit back down instantly. They rode the elevator in silence. As the numbers ticked up, 20, 30, 40, Damon mentally rehearsed the financials. Stratosphere Airlines, debt load $4 billion. Customer satisfaction rating, historic low. Executive compensation, historic high. The elevator doors pinged open. The boardroom was chaos. A dozen men and women in various states of undress, ties loosened, jackets off, were scrambling around a long mahogany table. In the center sat Richard Sterling, the aging founder of the airline, looking tired and grey. And to his right, holding a glass of scotch and laughing at something on his phone, was Chadwick Sterling. He was still wearing the clothes he flew in. Dad, relax, Chadwick was saying, his feet propped up on the table. This investor is desperate. Obsidian Capital? Never heard of them. Some boutique firm trying to make a name. We squeeze them for another 10%. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind Damon. The room froze. Richard Sterling stood up, smoothing his hair. You must be the representative from Obsidian? Damon walked to the head of the table. He didn't shake hands. He placed his laptop, the same water-damaged, cheap laptop from the flight, onto the polished wood. I'm not a representative, Damon said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am Obsidian. Chadwick squinted, lowering his scotch. He tilted his head, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. He looked at the laptop. He looked at Damon's face. Wait a minute, Chadwick laughed, standing up unsteadily. I know you. You're the guy from 34B, the one who wet himself. He turned to the board, gesturing wildly. Dad, this is a joke. This is the guy I told you about. The loser in economy who tried to lecture me on seat pitch. Security, get this clown out of here. Chadwick reached for the phone on the table. Damon didn't flinch. He simply pressed the power button on the laptop. It sputtered, sparked, and failed to turn on. You owe me a new laptop, Chadwick, Damon said softly. I owe you a kick in the Chadwick started. Sit down, you idiot, Richard Sterling roared, his face draining of color. He looked at Damon with terrified recognition. He had seen the Forbes covers. He knew the face now that the glasses were gone. Chadwick, shut your mouth. This is Damon Kinsley. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Chadwick's mouth hung open. Kinsley, the corporate raider. I prefer asset optimizer, Damon said. He pulled a chair out and sat down. Now, let's talk about the price of water on Flight 902. It seems to be costing you about $400 million. Damon slid a folder across the table. The deal is off the table, Damon said, unless we make some immediate structural changes, starting with the Vice President of Customer Experience. Chadwick dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. But first, Damon checked his watch. I believe I have a meeting with my flight crew in the morning. I want you all here for that, especially you, Chadwick. I want you to see exactly how a nobody handles trash. Damon looked at the terrified board members. Meeting adjourned until 8:00 a.m. Don't be late. He stood up and walked out, leaving Chadwick Sterling standing in a puddle of scotch, looking very much like a man who had just realized he was in the middle seat of his own life. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Stratosphere Airlines headquarters with a blinding brilliance that felt less like a new day and more like an interrogation lamp. Inside the executive boardroom on the 40th floor, the air was cold enough to preserve meat. It was 7:45 a.m. The meeting wasn't scheduled to start until 8:00 a.m., but no one dared to be late. Richard Sterling, the founder who had built the airline from a single crop duster into a global carrier, sat at the right hand of the head chair. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. His hands, usually steady as they signed multi-million-dollar leases, were clasping a ceramic coffee mug so tightly his knuckles were white. He wasn't drinking the coffee. He was just holding on to something solid. Next to him sat Chadwick. The arrogance of the previous night had evaporated, replaced by a jittery, hungover nausea. He was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue, Italian cut, but his eyes were bloodshot. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through news feeds, praying that the name Obsidian Capital hadn't leaked to the press yet. Every time the elevator chimed in the hallway, Chadwick flinched. "Stop fidgeting," Richard hissed, not looking at his son. "You look guilty." "I didn't do anything illegal, Dad," Chadwick whispered, his voice cracking. I had a bit of fun with a passenger. How was I supposed to know he was sitting on $4 billion? "That's the problem, Chadwick," Richard said, his voice low and trembling with repressed fury. "You think fun is humiliating people you deem beneath you. And now you've handed the executioner a loaded gun." The heavy double doors swung open, but it wasn't Damon Kinsley. It was Tiffany, the senior purser from Flight 902, followed by 2 other flight attendants, Mark and Sarah. They looked pristine in their uniforms, pressed skirts, perfectly tied neck scarves, wings pinned straight. They had been summoned by HR for a priority debriefing regarding a VIP incident, a code usually reserved for when a celebrity complained about the champagne temperature. Tiffany walked in with her chin up, looking annoyed rather than worried. She spotted Chadwick instantly, and a wave of relief washed over her face. She offered a small conspiratorial smile. In her mind, this was a formality. Chadwick was the VP. He would smooth this over, they would sign a non-disclosure agreement, and she would probably get a bonus for her trouble. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Tiffany said, nodding to Richard, then beaming at Chadwick. Mr. Sterling. We got here as fast as we could. I assumed this is about the incident with the disruptive passenger in 34B. I already filed the report. He was aggressive, non-compliant, and harassed the crew." The room went deadly silent. The other board members, men and women who managed logistics, finance, and legal, stared at Tiffany with a mixture of pity and horror. They knew what she didn't. Chadwick didn't smile back. He stared at the mahogany table, refusing to meet her eyes. "Take a seat, Miss Davis," Richard said, his voice flat. He gestured to 3 folding chairs positioned awkwardly at the foot of the massive table, far away from the power center. "And do not speak until you are spoken to." Tiffany's smile faltered. She exchanged a confused glance with Mark. The atmosphere wasn't right. Usually these meetings were casual, filled with jokes about the cattle in economy. This felt like a funeral. Is everything okay?" Tiffany asked, her voice losing its polished edge. "If this is about the water spill, I can explain. The passenger—" "I said sit down," Richard barked. Tiffany sat. She smoothed her skirt, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. She looked at Chadwick again, silently begging for a signal, a wink, anything. Chadwick remained a statue of misery. For 15 minutes, they sat in silence. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the ticking of the analog clock on the wall. The psychological weight of the silence was crushing. Every minute that passed without Damon Kinsley appearing made the tension ratchet tighter. It was a power move, and everyone in the room knew it. Damon wasn't late. He was letting them marinate in their own anxiety. At 8:03 a.m., the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and the rhythm of footsteps clicked against the marble floor. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Arthur, the driver, entered first, holding the door. Then Damon Kinsley walked in. He was transformed. Gone was the rumpled traveller. He wore a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him like armour. A platinum watch glinted on his wrist. Subtle, but worth more than the aircraft they had flown on. He carried nothing but a thin file folder. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at Richard. He walked straight to the head of the table, the empty seat that controlled the room. He remained standing, placing his hands on the leather chair back. His gaze slowly traveled down the length of the table, past the trembling executives, past the pale-faced Chadwick, and landed directly on Tiffany. Tiffany gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She recognized the eyes. They were the same calm, observant eyes of the man in 34B, the man she had sneered at, the man she had told to clean it up. "Good morning," Damon said. His voice was soft, warm even, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "I trust everyone had a more comfortable flight home than I did." No one breathed. Damon pulled out the chair and sat. "Let's begin." Damon opened the thin file folder. He took out a single sheet of paper and placed it in the center of the table. It was a printout of Stratosphere Airlines' stock performance over the last 5 years, a red line trending aggressively downward. "This company," Damon began, tapping the paper, "is bleeding $2 million a day. You are surviving on debt and the goodwill of legacy banks who are too afraid to let a major carrier collapse. But goodwill runs out, and debt comes due." He looked at Richard Sterling. "I agreed to buy a controlling stake in this airline because I believed the infrastructure was sound. I believed the rot was only financial." Damon paused, leaning forward. "But yesterday, I discovered the rot is cultural, and cultural rot is terminal." He turned his head slowly, locking eyes with Chadwick. "Chadwick," Damon said, "would you like to introduce our guests at the end of the table?" Chadwick swallowed hard. He tried to stand, but his legs felt like jelly, so he remained seated. This is Miss Davis, senior purser, and her team." "Ms. Davis," Damon repeated. He swiveled his chair to face her. Tiffany was shaking, visibly shaking. She gripped the edges of her folding chair. "Sir, Mr. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." You didn't know what, Tiffany? Damon asked, his voice genuinely curious. You didn't know I was the man about to save your pension fund? Or you didn't know that I was a human being deserving of basic dignity? I was just following protocol, she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, Chadwick, he asked for the ice. He made the joke. I didn't want to upset the VIP. Ah, Damon nodded. The Nuremberg defense. I was just following orders. It's a classic. He stood up and walked slowly down the length of the table toward the crew. As he approached, Mark and Sarah looked down at their laps, unable to witness the carnage. Damon stopped right in front of Tiffany. He towered over her. Let's review the economics of your decision, Tiffany, Damon said, pacing back and forth in front of them like a professor. You prioritized a single non-revenue passenger, Chadwick, over a paying customer. You calculated that pleasing the boss's son was worth alienating the public. In a vacuum, that's a survival instinct. I get it, he stopped it. But then you engaged in active humiliation. You laughed. You withheld service. You threatened me with security when I asked for water. Damon reached into his pocket and pulled out a bottle of water. Premium Fiji water from the boardroom sideboard. He unscrewed the cap. Tiffany flinched, closing her eyes, expecting him to throw it. Damon poured the water into a glass on the table next to her. He set the bottle down gently. Drink, he said. You look dehydrated. Fear dries out the mouth. Tiffany stared at the glass. She couldn't move. The problem, Tiffany, Damon continued, walking back to his seat, is not that you were rude. It's that you are a symptom of a disease that starts at the head of this table. Damon turned to Chadwick. The playfulness was gone. His face hardened into granite. Chadwick, stand up. Chadwick stood. He was taller than Damon, but in that moment he looked like a child. You threw a bottle of water at me, Damon said. You called the paying customers cattle. You openly discussed reducing legroom to painful levels while sitting in a seat that costs 10 times what they pay. You are the vice president of customer experience. Damon picked up the stock chart and ripped it in half. You don't have customers, Chadwick. You have hostages. People fly Stratosphere because it's the cheapest option, not because they want to. And you treat them like dirt because you think they have no choice. I was joking, Chadwick stammered. It was banter. You have to understand the stress of the job. Stress? Damon let out a sharp, cold laugh. Stress is wondering if you can afford the ticket to get to a job interview. Stress is sitting in a middle seat, hoping the person next to you doesn't spill coffee on the only suit you own. You don't know stress. You know privilege. Damon pressed a button on the intercom console on the table. Arthur, send in the legal team. The side doors opened, and 4 lawyers in grey suits marched in. They weren't Stratosphere lawyers. They were Obsidian lawyers. They carried stacks of documents. What is this? Richard Sterling asked, panic rising in his voice. Damon, please. We can handle this internally. I'll fire Tiffany. I'll suspend Chadwick for a month. We don't need to make this a legal production. You aren't firing anyone, Richard, Damon said calmly. Because as of 8:15 a.m., when my funds transferred, you don't have the authority to hire a janitor, let alone fire a VP. Damon picked up a document from the first lawyer. This is the new organizational chart for Stratosphere Airlines. It's effective immediately. He looked at Tiffany, Mark, and Sarah. You 3 are suspended pending a full investigation into flight crew conduct standards. You will surrender your badges today. Your pay is frozen. If you want to work in this industry again, you will attend a 6-week retraining course at your own expense on empathy and customer service. If you pass, you can apply for a ground crew position, Loading bags. In the rain. Let's see how you like the view from the bottom." Tiffany sobbed aloud, her face buried in her hands. "And now, the main event," Damon said, turning to Chadwick. "You can't fire me," Chadwick blurted out, his face red. "I have a contract. I have a severance package. My name is on the building." "Technically, yes," Damon said. "You have a golden parachute clause. If terminated without cause, you get $10 million. Richard Sterling looked hopeful. "We can negotiate the payout, Damon." "I'm not terminating him without cause," Damon said. He signaled to the lawyer, who projected a video onto the massive screen at the end of the room. It was grainy footage. It was from the perspective of the passenger sitting in 34C, the nervous flyer. He had been recording the turbulence on his phone, but he had captured everything. The video showed Chadwick laughing. It showed him tossing the water bottle. It captured the audio perfectly. Did the seat pocket safety card speak to me? Damon paused the video on Chadwick's sneering face. "This is gross misconduct and brand-damaging behavior, as defined in Section 14, Paragraph 2 of your own employment contract," Damon said. "I'm invoking the morality clause." The room gasped. The morality clause was the nuclear option. It meant zero severance, zero benefits, immediate termination. "You're fired, Chadwick," Damon said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silence. "With cause. You leave this building with nothing but the clothes on your back. And since I now own the building, I suggest you leave quickly before I have you arrested for trespassing." Chadwick looked at his father. "Dad, do something." Richard Sterling looked at the video screen. He looked at the stock chart ripped in half. He looked at Damon Kinsley, a man who had the power to bankrupt the entire family with a single phone call. Richard looked down at his coffee mug. "You heard him, son. Get out." Chadwick stood frozen. His world, built on Daddy's money and unearned status, had shattered in less than 5 minutes. "But," Chadwick whispered, "my laptop, my office." "Your office is now a lactation room for employees," Damon said, checking his watch. "And as for your laptop, consider it payment for mine." Damon turned his back on them, looking out the window at the skyline. "Security," he said, not looking back. "Escort Mr. Sterling and the flight crew out, and cancel their parking validations. They can pay the daily rate." As the guard stepped forward and hands reached out to grab Chadwick's expensive suit, Damon added one last twist. "Oh, and Chadwick?" Chadwick turned, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down his face. "Don't try to fly stratosphere to get home," Damon said. "You're on the no-fly list." The elevator ride down from the 40th floor usually took 45 seconds. For Chadwick Sterling, Tiffany, and the 2 junior flight attendants, it felt like a descent into hell that lasted a lifetime. Inside the mirrored box of the elevator, the silence was suffocating. 2 burly security guards stood with their backs to the doors, their arms crossed, creating a physical wall between the disgraced group and the control panel. Tiffany was weeping softly, the sound reflecting off the steel walls. Her mascara ran in dark, jagged rivers down her cheeks, staining the pristine white collar of the uniform she would never wear again. Chadwick leaned against the back rail, his breathing shallow. He wasn't crying. He was vibrating with a toxic mix of shock and adrenaline. He stared at his reflection in the polished brass doors. "How did this happen?" he thought. "Yesterday I was a god. Today I'm a trespasser." "This isn't legal," Chadwick muttered, his voice sounding small in the enclosed space. "He can't just seize my shares. My father will fix this." One of the security guards, a man named Henderson who had worked at the building for 15 years, turned his head slightly. Henderson had once been written up by Chadwick for wearing the wrong shade of grey socks. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, his voice deep and gravelly, "please refrain from speaking. You are currently unauthorized personnel." The ding of the elevator arriving at the lobby sounded like a gavel. The doors slid open. If the boardroom had been a private execution, the lobby was a public flogging. The morning rush was in full swing. Hundreds of Stratosphere employees, pilots, gate agents, accountants, interns were streaming through the turnstiles. As the security team escorted the group out, the hum of conversation in the lobby died instantly. Heads turned, phones were raised. The sight of the Crown Prince of Stratosphere Airlines being marched out by security, followed by a weeping flight crew, was a spectacle no one could look away from. Chadwick tried to straighten his jacket. He tried to muster the arrogant strut he was famous for. But it's hard to look powerful when a guard has a hand firmly hovering near your elbow. "Don't look at them," Chadwick hissed at Tiffany. "Keep your head up." But Tiffany couldn't. She saw the faces of the ground staff, the people she had ignored for years, the people whose greetings she rarely returned. They weren't looking at her with sympathy. They were looking with a grim satisfaction. They reached the glass revolving doors. Outside, the sidewalk was chaotic. But as they emerged into the biting New York wind, a new sound greeted them. Click, 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 flash. Arthur, Damon's driver and right-hand man, was efficient. He hadn't just called the board, he had tipped off the financial press. A wall of photographers and reporters was waiting at the curb. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you've been ousted for misconduct? Is the airline filing for bankruptcy? Ms. Davis, any comment on the viral video?" Chadwick recoiled, shielding his eyes from the flashes. "Get these vultures away from me," he screamed at Henderson. "My jurisdiction ends at the door, sir," Henderson said, stopping at the threshold. He blocked the revolving door so Chadwick couldn't get back in. "Have a nice day." Chadwick was stranded on the sidewalk. He looked around for his company car, the black Mercedes that usually waited for him. It wasn't there. His driver had already been reassigned. "Taxi!" Chadwick yelled, waving his arm frantically. But it was rush hour. Yellow cabs zoomed past, full of paying customers. Tiffany stood beside him, shivering in the cold wind without her coat, which she had left in the crew lounge upstairs. "Chadwick, what do we do?" Chadwick looked at her with pure venom. "We? There is no we, you idiot. You cost me my company." He shoved past her, storming down the block toward the subway entrance, a place he hadn't set foot in since he was a teenager. As he descended into the grime of the underground, the last thing he saw was the massive digital billboard above the Stratosphere HQ. The old slogan, "Stratosphere, above the rest," flickered and changed. It was a system update Damon had already pushed through. The new text simply read, "Stratosphere, under new management." 3 days later, the initial euphoria of the takeover had faded, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Damon Kinsley sat in what used to be Richard Sterling's office. He had stripped the room. The expensive Persian rugs were gone. The wet bar was closed. The pretentious oil paintings of airplanes were replaced by whiteboards covered in schematics and financial projections. Damon hadn't slept in 36 hours. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie was gone, and he was eating a cold sandwich from the vending machine. Across from him sat Arthur, looking grim. "The stock stabilized at $6, Arthur reported, looking at a tablet. The public loves the justice at 30,000 feet narrative. Social media is calling you the people's CEO. But the institutional investors are spooked. They think you're going to turn the airline into a charity. Let them be spooked, Damon said, chewing slowly. We're not running a charity. We're running a business that doesn't hate its customers. What about the fleet inspection? Arthur hesitated. That's the problem. Our auditors have been going through the maintenance logs since you took over. There are gaps. Big ones. Damon stopped eating. Define gaps. Entire maintenance cycles for the 737 fleet are marked as completed in the digital system, Arthur explained, sliding the tablet across the desk. But there are no corresponding invoices for parts, no labor logs, no sign-offs from the chief mechanics. Damon scrolled through the data. His blood ran cold. They were pencil-whipping the inspections, he whispered. They were marking planes as safe without actually checking them to save money on downtime. It gets worse, Arthur said. We can't access the raw server data to prove who authorized it. Someone wiped the admin logs remotely about 2 hours ago. Damon looked up sharply. Remotely? Who has that kind of access? Only 2 people, Arthur said. The director of IT and the former VP of customer experience. Chadwick, Damon growled. The phone on the desk buzzed. It was the emergency line. Mr. Kinsley, the voice of the operations manager crackled, sounding panicked. We have a situation at JFK. Flight 404 to London. The pilot is refusing to take off. Why? Damon asked, grabbing his jacket. He received an anonymous email 5 minutes ago, the manager said. It contained a detailed report claiming the landing gear on his specific aircraft has a microscopic fracture that was ignored during the last check. The email says if he flies, the gear will collapse on landing. Damon closed his eyes. It was a hostage situation. Ground the plane, Damon ordered. Get the passengers off. Now. Sir, that will cost us a fortune. The media is already tweeting about delays. I said ground it, Damon shouted. And ground every plane mentioned in the maintenance logs, all of them. That's 40% of the fleet, sir. It will bankrupt us by Friday. Better bankrupt than dead, Damon said, slamming the phone down. He looked at Arthur. He's not just angry, Arthur. He's burning the house down. Across town, in the dim light of a high-end hotel bar, one of the few places that would still accept his credit card, Chadwick Sterling took a sip of a martini. He looked disheveled. He hadn't shaved in 3 days, but his eyes were bright with manic energy. Sitting across from him was a man named Silas, a freelance consultant who specialized in corporate espionage and bad PR. Silas wore a cheap suit and had the nervous tick of looking over his shoulder every few seconds. The email went out, Silas whispered, sliding a burner phone across the table. The pilot took the bait. Flight 404 is grounded, and I just leaked the tip to the New York Post. Chadwick smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Good. What's the headline? Safety crisis at Stratosphere. New owner cuts corners, Silas quoted. The narrative is simple. The airline was fine until Kinsley took over. Now suddenly, planes are falling apart. We frame him as the incompetent raider who fired the experienced leadership, meaning you, and put lives at risk to save a buck. Perfect, Chadwick said. By the end of the week, the stock will be under $1. The board will beg my father to come back. They'll beg me to come back to restore confidence. There is one risk, Silas warned. If Kinsley actually finds the physical records, if he finds the memos where you authorized the skipped maintenance. He won't, Chadwick said, tapping his temple. Because those memos are in a box in my mother's basement in the Hamptons. Paper copies only. No digital trail. Chadwick leaned back, feeling the first warmth of victory he'd felt since the water hit Damon's lap. He humiliated me in front of the world, Chadwick whispered. Now, I'm going to make him the man who destroyed an American icon. I'm going to make him toxic. Back at HQ, the situation was spiraling. The news broke at noon. Breaking: mass groundings at Stratosphere Airlines. Safety concerns cited. Damon stood in the center of the Operations Control Center, OCC. It was a massive room filled with screens, usually a place of quiet coordination. Now, it was a riot of ringing phones and shouting dispatchers. "Stock is down 12%, someone yelled. "TSA is reporting angry mobs at Gate 42. Damon stood still in the chaos. He knew this was a trap. If he kept the planes grounded, the airline would run out of cash in days. If he flew them and something happened, he would go to prison. Chadwick had cornered him. "Arthur," Damon said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get the car." "Where are we going, sir?" "The crisis is here." "No," Damon said, buttoning his coat. "The crisis is here. The solution is in the Hamptons." Arthur looked confused. "The Hamptons? Why?" "Because Chadwick is lazy," Damon said, his eyes narrowing. "He never did his own work. He never shredded his own documents. And he has a mother who notoriously hates clutter." Damon turned to the operations director. "Keep them grounded. Buy every passenger a hotel room. I don't care what it costs. I'll be back in 4 hours. And if the press asks where the CEO is going during the biggest crisis in company history," Damon adjusted his collar, "tell them I'm going to take out the trash." The black Rolls-Royce tore down the Long Island Expressway, rain lashing against the windshield like shrapnel. Inside, the silence was absolute. Damon Kinsley wasn't looking at the falling stock prices on his phone anymore. He was looking at a satellite map of the Sterling estate in East Hampton. "We have a problem, sir," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the mirrors. "We're being followed. Black SUV. 2 cars back. It's been with us since we left the city." "Silas," Damon murmured. "Chadwick's fixer. He knows we're making a play." "Do you want me to lose them?" Arthur asked, his grip tightening on the wheel. "No," Damon said, checking the time. It was 4:08 p.m. The markets were closing. Let them come. Witnesses are useful. They pulled up to the Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion behind wrought-iron gates. Damon didn't wait for the intercom. He stepped out into the rain, holding a large manila envelope. He pressed the buzzer. A moment later, the gate buzzed open. Not because of Damon, but because Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, Chadwick's mother, was expecting a delivery. She stood at the front door, a woman of impeccable grooming, who looked like she hadn't encountered a problem she couldn't ignore since 1985. "You're not the florist," she observed icily, as Damon walked up the steps, water dripping from his coat. "No, Mrs. Sterling. I'm the man trying to keep your son out of federal prison," Damon said. He handed her the envelope. Inside wasn't a subpoena, but a simple printout of a flight manifest. "Your son, Chadwick, authorized the grounding of safe planes to blackmail me," Damon said quickly. "But in doing so, he left a digital signature that the FBI is currently tracing. I know he keeps his personal records here. If I find them before the feds do, we can settle this as a corporate dispute. If the FBI finds them first, he goes away for 20 years for endangering public safety." It was a bluff, a massive, dangerous bluff. The FBI wasn't tracing anything yet. Eleanor paled. She looked at the driveway where the black SUV, Silas's car, had just screeched to a halt. 2 men were getting out. "The basement," she whispered, stepping aside. "The climate-controlled storage room. Box 42. Damon ran. He navigated the labyrinthine hallways of the mansion, down the stairs, into a basement that smelled of cedar and old money. He found the storage room. Rows of boxes were stacked to the ceiling. Box 40, Box 41, Box 42. He ripped the lid off. There they were. Memos, physical logs, signatures in blue ink. 2. Maintenance Division, from Chadwick Sterling. Subject, Cost Reduction Initiative. Defer inspection cycles B and C until Q4. Don't touch those, a voice sneered from the doorway. Chadwick stood there, flanked by Silas. Chadwick was holding a heavy brass fireplace poker. He looked unhinged, his eyes wide and frantic. "You really are a cockroach, Kinsley," Chadwick laughed, stepping into the room. "You just couldn't take the loss. Give me the box." "It's over, Chadwick," Damon said, holding up a specific memo. "This is dated 3 months ago. You knowingly deferred maintenance on the landing gear. You risked hundreds of lives to boost your quarterly bonus." "Nobody died," Chadwick screamed. "It was a calculated risk. That's business." "No," Damon said, his voice calm. "That's manslaughter waiting to happen." "Get the box, Silas," Chadwick ordered. Silas stepped forward, pulling a switchblade. Suddenly, a shadow loomed behind them. Arthur appeared in the doorway, soaking wet and looking very unhappy. He grabbed Silas by the collar of his cheap suit and tossed him effortlessly into a stack of vintage luggage. Silas groaned and didn't get up. Chadwick backed away, raising the poker. "Stay back! I'm warning you!" Damon didn't flinch. He walked straight up to Chadwick. "Go ahead," Damon said softly. "Hit me. Add assault to the list. Or you can put the poker down, and I walk out of here with these papers. I'll fire you publicly, but I won't press charges. You'll keep your freedom, but you'll lose your reputation." Chadwick's hand trembled. He looked at the papers. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the life of luxury around him that was slowly crumbling. The poker clattered to the floor. "You ruined everything," Chadwick sobbed, sinking to his knees. "I didn't ruin anything," Damon said, picking up the box. "I just turned on the lights." 3 months later, Flight 902 from Zurich to New York was boarding. The cabin looked different. The lighting was softer. The seats in economy had been replaced with newer models, offering 2 extra inches of legroom. A flight attendant walked down the aisle. It was Tiffany, but she wasn't wearing the senior purser uniform. She was wearing the standard junior uniform. She looked tired, but her smile was genuine. She stopped at row 34. "Can I get you some water, sir?" she asked the passenger in 34B. The man looked up. It wasn't Damon. It was just a regular guy in a hoodie. "Yeah, thanks," he said. Tiffany handed him a bottle. "Let me know if you need anything else. It's a long flight." She walked back to the galley. She had passed the retraining course. It had been the hardest 6 weeks of her life, scrubbing toilets and role-playing empathy exercises until she cried. But she had learned. She had kept her job. And more importantly, she had learned that everyone in every seat was a person. Up in the cockpit, the pilot announced, "Welcome aboard Stratosphere Airlines, now a Kinsley Group company. We're cleared for an on-time departure." In the back of the plane, tucked into the seat pocket, was the in-flight magazine. The cover featured a picture of Damon Kinsley standing on the tarmac, sleeves rolled up. The headline read, "The Turnaround King." And somewhere in a small apartment in Queens, Chadwick Sterling sat in his pajamas, scrolling through LinkedIn on a cracked phone, looking for entry-level consulting gigs. He saw the post about Stratosphere's record-breaking safety scores. He went to type a nasty comment. Then he stopped. He looked at his empty apartment. He deleted the draft, put the phone down, and went to wash the dishes. The plane took off, climbing high above the clouds, leaving the turbulence behind. So what is the price of arrogance? For Chadwick Sterling, it was a multi-million-dollar inheritance and a lifetime of regret. For Tiffany, it was a hard lesson in humility. They looked at Damon Kinsley and saw a nobody because he didn't fit their image of power. They forgot the golden rule of business and of life. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Damon didn't fix the airline just by pouring money into it. He fixed it by removing the people who thought they were better than the customers they served. He proved that true value isn't found in a first-class ticket or a designer suit. It's found in integrity, competence, and the simple act of treating people with respect. In the end, the trash in seat 34B was the only thing that kept the company from crashing. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and corporate justice, smash that like button. It helps us create more stories like this for you. Have you ever been treated poorly by someone who didn't know who you were? Or have you ever seen karma hit someone instantly? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new video. We release new stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind. You never know who you're sitting next to.